Before the iPhone conquered the world, there was a phone that became a true symbol of youth and style. Everyone knew it and wanted it. That phone was Sony Ericsson. But today, we no longer see phones from this brand. Why? What went wrong? How did such a popular device suddenly disappear? This video is about the history of a brand that once set the trends in the mobile phone world. The story begins in 2001. Sony Ericsson was actually a combination of two brands. Sony, a world-famous electronics giant from Japan, known for its Walkman music player and Trinitron CRT TV. And Ericsson from Sweden, which started with telecommunications equipment, focusing on mobile communications and wireless technologies. One side had expertise in hardware and design, the other in communications and large-scale production. It seemed like a perfect match, didn't it? But in reality, their alliance was less a triumph and more of a lost attempt at survival for both companies. In 2001, the mobile phone market was fiercely competitive. Nokia dominated with more than 35% market share, and its Nokia 3310 was the best-selling phone in the world. Ericsson had the technology, but its phones looked too conservative. Sales were falling and the company was losing money. Sony, with its huge electronics lineup, couldn't compete in the mobile market against Japanese rivals like Sharp and Panasonic. To change the situation, Sony and Ericsson decided to join forces. That's how Sony Ericsson was born, a joint project between two giants that was supposed to give them a chance to survive and succeed. They dreamed of creating the next generation of phones, truly cutting-edge devices. Back then, there was a real battle for functionality and style. Nokia, Motorola, Samsung, everyone was trying to make their phones brighter, more convenient, and more appealing to users. At first, the brand wasn't taken seriously. But soon, one model surprised the whole world, the Sony Ericsson T68i. It was revolutionary for its time. Why? It became the first mass-market phone with a color screen and Bluetooth data transfer. While others were still playing Snake on black and white displays, the T68i could send colorful MMS messages, change themes and wallpapers, and even connect to a computer. In the following years, Sony Ericsson released a number of truly classic models, proving that a mobile phone could be not only functional, but also stylish. Do you remember the Walkman series? In 2005 came the W800C, the first phone to integrate the legendary Walkman music brand. A dedicated music button, a built-in headphone amp, and a bright orange and white design, all of these made it an instant hit. In later years came the W810 and W580, from popular mainstream models to top-of-the-line devices that sold like hotcakes. Sony Ericsson had perfectly integrated Sony's music identity into phones, winning over the youth market. In 2005, Sony Ericsson's global shipments exceeded 50 million units. Annual revenue was more than $10 billion, about 9% of the global market. In the pre-iPhone era, it was the true peak of success. Sony Ericsson was one of the few companies where software and hardware worked in complete harmony. On the software side, Sony Ericsson had its own UIQ system, more functional than most phones at the time. On the hardware side, each company did what it did best, and it worked flawlessly. Sony was responsible for design, cameras, and audio chips, while Ericsson handled communication and signal optimization. The audio quality was as good as an MP3 player, and the photos rivaled compact cameras. It was the perfect combination. You could say that between 2005 and 2008, Sony Ericsson was a true leader in the mobile market. But the happiness didn't last long. In 2007, Apple released the first iPhone. Yeah, at first the system lagged. The camera was weak and it didn't even have copy and paste function. But it changed the very idea of what a phone should be. While Sony Ericsson engineers were perfecting keyboards and music features, Apple was already working on multi-touch screens and an app ecosystem. Many believe that the iPhone's arrival is what killed Sony Ericsson. But in reality, the problems began even earlier. One major issue was the operating system. As mentioned, early Sony Ericsson phones ran on UIQ, and later most models switched to Symbian. But Symbian was already outdated. Navigation was clunky and the app ecosystem was limited. Unlike the smooth iPhone interface, Sony Ericsson phones forced users to dig through 5 menu levels, and apps still ran slowly. The brand's strategy also faltered. From 2006 to 2008, Sony Ericsson released far too many models. W595, K660 and the UTJ series. Names overlapped, features repeated, and prices were often nearly the same, making it hard for customers to choose. Company resources were wasted, and even store employees struggled to explain the differences between models. In 2008, Android appeared, and companies like Samsung, HTC, and Motorola began shifting from feature phones to smartphones. Sony Ericsson also tried to react, releasing its first smartphone, the Xperia X10, on Windows Mobile, developed with Taiwan's HTC. But the result was disappointing. The interface was confusing, the performance was slow, and the phone lagged. So even though Sony Ericsson was one of the first to enter the smartphone market, it chose the wrong operating system and the wrong partner. This was the key reason why Sony Ericsson failed to adapt in time. By 2008, the iPhone 3G was already a hit. It gave users what they wanted: a touchscreen and an app ecosystem. Meanwhile, Sony Ericsson was still betting on hardware, releasing slider phones with cameras and the Xperia X10. The products weren't terrible. They were just completely out of step with the trends, and the company couldn't keep up with the market's pace. Have you noticed that the company hardly had a single successful smartphone? The W and K series, as good as they were still just feature phones, not smartphones. The operating system was inconvenient. Even Microsoft later abandoned Windows Mobile, and that was the turning point for Sony Ericsson. And finally, in 2009, the company switched to Android, but even then, it was too late. The Sony Ericsson X10 launched with Android 1.6, when on the market there was already version 2.1. A sluggish interface and app compatibility issues meant HTC and Samsung had the upper hand, looking much more appealing. Sony Ericsson tried to catch up, but the gap was too wide. The Xperia Arc had a beautiful design, but couldn't compete with Samsung's Galaxy S series. The Xperia Play tried to combine a phone with a PSP, but the market wasn't impressed. On top of that, the Android segment was extremely competitive. Price wars, battles over performance, aggressive advertising. Sony Ericsson had neither the resources nor the speed, so sales kept bringing losses. Meanwhile, Samsung Galaxy series was everywhere with huge ad campaigns and frequent updates. HTC was launching Nexus devices and innovating. Sony Ericsson, on the other hand, had slow updates, laggy interfaces, and weak software resources. Even basic multitasking didn't work well. Buying a new phone, you might wait half a year for a system update, or never get one at all. Naturally, users switched to competitors. The lineup was also chaotic. The Xperia models were so confusing that no one could remember them. Xperia X10, X8, X2, Play, Neo, Ray, Mini Arc, all with similar names but different features. The release rhythm made no sense either. Today a flagship, tomorrow a mid-range, the day after a gaming phone. No single model could truly win the market. There were also internal issues. Sony and Ericsson had very different corporate styles. Sony, a Japanese company, valued design and brand. Ericsson, a Swedish company, focused on engineering standards. Management, product strategy, and even workplace culture constantly clashed. Even basic software development was split across teams with poor communication. Smartphones were often delayed or launched with serious bugs because of these disagreements. After 2010, Sony Ericsson's market share dropped into single digits, and the company lost money year after year. The next year, Sony lost patience and bought out Ericsson's shares, fully absorbing the brand, which was then renamed Sony Mobile. Thus, Sony Ericsson became history. It was a desperate move by Sony to completely restructure its mobile business, but sadly, it was already too late. Many thought this meant Sony was leaving the phone market altogether, but no. Sony decided to regroup and try again. This time not just selling phones, but building a full Sony ecosystem. In 2012 came the Xperia S, the first smartphone fully developed by Sony. The design carried their signature style: clean lines, a metal body, and a transparent light strip at the bottom. It featured a 720p screen, a 12-megapixel camera, and a dual-core processor, top specs for that time. It was Sony's way of saying, "I'm back."
Yeah!
But was Sony really back? The brand attracted fans thanks to its resources in film industry, music, gaming, and TVs. But the promised integration never happened. Buying a phone, users expected exclusive content from PlayStation and Sony Pictures. In reality, the teams worked separately on their own projects. Corporate resources stayed fragmented, departments didn't collaborate, and users never got the seamless integration between Sony devices and services that they were promised. The Xperia product strategy was also confusing. 3 to 4 flagships in just 6 months, then new models every year. Sometimes older models were barely established before the lineup changed again. Prices went straight into the premium range, competing directly with the iPhone and Galaxy S. But to succeed in the premium market, you need either clear technological or ecosystem advantages or a lower price. Sony had neither, so the phones were praised but didn't sell. Of course, Sony did have strengths, especially in cameras. Many flagships used Sony sensors. But ironically, competitors' phones often took better photos than Sony's own. Innovations like waterproofing, 4K displays, and high-res audio were impressive, but not critical for most users. Still, Sony sometimes managed to surprise. For example, in 2013, the Xperia Z stood out with its great camera, water resistance, and powerful specs. But problems soon returned.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Frequent updates to the Z series, a messy lineup, slow system updates, and even overheating. Older models didn't drop in price, leaving buyers feeling cheated. In the following years, Sony's smartphone market share kept falling, below 1% in 2015, and by 2018 it had even fallen out of the top 3 in Japan, losing to the iPhone and other brands. Many thought Sony would exit the market, but the company didn't give up. It scaled back and focused on the premium segment, keeping flagship sales alive in Japan, Taiwan and Hong Kong. Phones with 21:9 aspect ratio screens for watching movies, integration of Bravia and PlayStation technologies. Sony turned its phones into luxury products for brand fans. Sales, however, didn't grow, but the brand remained meaningful for its loyal audience. By 2020, Sony Mobile's global shipments fell to just 400,000 units, less than 0.2% of the global market. Meanwhile, iPhones and Samsung were selling by the millions. Sony remained a niche flagship, with no chance of returning to the mass market. Looking back, the fall of Sony Ericsson and the transformation into Sony Mobile shows a simple truth. A strong name in the market cannot replace the right strategy. Sony Ericsson once thrived on design and features, but it failed to keep up with smartphone evolution, never solved its internal problems, and didn't take advantage of its ecosystem. Sony Mobile made beautiful and high-quality devices, but its software, marketing, and user experience lagged behind, and no amount of hardware could compete with others' ecosystems. But still, does Sony Mobile have a future? Maybe, but not as a mass-market brand. Today, Sony is an example of persistence, staying in the premium segment, focusing on fan culture and media content experience. These smartphones aren't mainstream, but they preserve Sony's unique style, which true fans will still appreciate. In the end, every former giant loses not only to competitors, but also to its own inability to keep up with the times. And what about you? Do you remember which Sony Ericsson you had? Share in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you and see you next time.